Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Jaime Davila. He has written Forgotten How One Man Unlocked the Modern World, and his book talks about the first mechanized sawmill in the Netherlands. He has a background in engineering and technology and the history of innovation. I was telling him in the little pre-production meeting we got together that I should never be hired to build a bridge. I should only be hired to arrange the things to build the bridge. So I'm glad we have someone who can actually do this and know about this stuff. So welcome, Jaime, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I want to kind of dive right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your book.
Okay. Well, about myself a little bit. I was born in Mexico. Uh, uh, went to, in northern Mexico, very close to the United States, and went to school in the United States and graduated from school in the United States and moved to Mexico City after graduation. And then I spent a business career in corporate life, half Mexico, and then I moved to the United States with my family in about the mid '80s, and have been here ever since. Um, and Raised our kids in New York, and have a house here in Connecticut, and uh, and we also have a home in Mexico City, where so we split our time between here and there. Um, and You very kindly mentioned my engineering background, and in fact, I do have an engineering degree. But when I moved to Mexico City in 1970, I couldn't get a job as an engineer, so I started doing the next best and closest thing, which was basically get involved with soap and detergent marketing. I mean, that is a great relationship. So uh, uh, I have being from the border with the United States and having seen a variety of things. I'm just a very curious person, and that brought me to the story that eventually evolved into this book.
No, absolutely. Now we know the person responsible for the popularity of Fabuloso. And
No, actually, that was a competitor. That was from a competitive company, but that's okay.
And
It is very successful here.
yeah, yes. Yeah, no, that's growing up in Colorado, you always knew the houses where either they were Hispanic or had Hispanic family members because always bottles of Fabuloso in the bathroom, in the
Right,
kitchen.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Very successful product.
Yeah. It's no, I love that about soaps and detergents. I dated a girl in college. Her grandfather had helped invent and held part of the patent for the chemical for color safe bleach. He like helped invent Clorox too, which was the first color safe bleach sort of thing. Yeah, which is just
Right.
so crazy. Speaking of that, no, but I mean that's really cool. So I want to dive into this book and how you got inspired to write it. The first sawmill in the
Okay.
world, mechanized, wind powered in the Netherlands. What got you? You're a curious person, so what got you into this, and why did you decide to write this book?
Well, actually, uh, I read random stuff and have for all my life. Uh, this may have been a magazine article that I read, and that dates me because obviously I was reading magazines before the advent of things like internet or websites. And and some years ago, I read about a fellow in the Netherlands, and I seem to at that time I thought it was around 1600,
Mm.
who had repurposed the windmill to cut wood. And at that time, my images of windmills were beautiful little things in all these tourist photographs of the Netherlands next to tulip fields. And I had always assumed that what windmills were for was to pump water out of the ground. I come from a very arid part of northern Mexico, and we would have windmills that would basically just draw water from deep water wells. And so that's what I assumed that they did. And so he said, "Oh, look, this clever fellow was able to create to repurpose one of these windmills to saw wood. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. I also happen to recall from that article uh, that he really didn't profit from it. So I just said, oh, okay. I just shelved it and put it away. Later on, I read a book about another interesting inventor, and it was a book by a lady called Deva Sobel, and the book was called Longitude, and I fell in love with that book. And it was about a man called John Harrison, who was essentially a carpenter in England, and he had won an award, or there had been a contest by the Royal Society to find somebody that could reliably find longitude. People knew how to do latitude, but they didn't know how to do longitude for trips to the ocean. And this carpenter created this chronometer, a chronometer that will work in the sea. And interestingly, that chronometer still exists. And I was so excited by that story and by how Miss Sobel wrote that book that at the time I was in Mexico City, and I actually flew to the Royal Observatory in Greenwich to go see that clock. By the way, it's still there. And the clocks that draw from it, because I just love that kind of stuff. But it
Yeah.
caused me to think about this guy again. And I said, okay, here's a guy that created something. I began to read about it. And in tracing and trying to understand the technology, I became persuaded that this guy was totally unsung, that what he had done was a lot more than just sawing wood. And so I understood the technology, and I came to the conclusion that, and by the way, I'm not a scholar or an accredited historian, so only I could come up with something like this. I say only I, not that others couldn't do it, but that would have the gall to say this was mankind's first industrial machine. Because when I thought about the first machines, we were talking about James Watt's steam engine or stuff like that. Uh, and I thought it was just totally unrecognized. So I understood a little bit more about the technology, and I said, "Hey, this is really, really a very clever thing that this man did, and I think that it deserves a little bit more recognition." That led to the next step, which is to say, what implications that invention had, and I came to the conclusion that they were astonishing, uh, and so the axis of the book starts at the technology for the sawmill, leads into what that invention cascaded into, and I came up with the staggering conclusion that we wouldn't exist today had it not been for that sawmill, and that we wouldn't be here talking, and we would probably not even exist had it not been for that sawmill, which I recognize as a very, very, uh, uh, again, staggering claim. Then finally, because in examining that and in challenging myself and sharing this with others, I came up with what I consider to be the third axis of the book, which is that we all assume that our lives, the modern world, and things were inevitable. And I realized that no, that it's all a contingency, and that we didn't have to exist. And so that's let's call it the third axis of the book. The first axis, technology. Second, the cascading effects of the technology and what it meant. And number three, that our lives are not inevitable.
Yeah, I mean that's it's kind of like the fellow who invented the process for getting nitrogen from the air is responsible for
Exactly.
modern fertilizers in agriculture. Sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is so
Yeah, the people,
and
I read about that.
yeah. And that was caused because they ran out of bat guano. That's what they were using for fertilizer because it was nitrogen rich. And well, bats only, put out so much and the demand had grown. And so they needed basically a replacement for a natural resource sort of thing. And that, and he found that out trying to research chemical weapons. So, um, yeah, nothing.
It's a very, very similar analog, yes.
Yeah, yeah, nothing advances tech faster than war. And so No, that's a fascinating. Well, what tell us a little bit about this sawmill thing. How did this all go down?
Okay, well, first of all, I should tell you a little bit about the inventor. His name was, and I'm going to butcher the Dutch language at this point. His name was Cornelison, as best I can been able to tell, and he lived in the town that I believe is pronounced Uitgeest, uh, and which is north of Amsterdam. And he was a semi-literate, uh, uh, basically millwright. I think he was a mechanic. He was a carpenter and mechanic of windmills, which were already a thing in the Netherlands at the time. They would grind grain and perhaps create oil and whatever, and do a variety of things. And he was a part of that group in that area, which and they were devoted to this. And uh, at the time, the Netherlands was in fact going through a bellicose period because they were attempting to. They had declared their independence from Spain, and Spain did not agree. That started an 80 years war to be able to settle that. So it was a very turbulent time. Uh, but to make ships, and the Netherlands was a very small little place, only 1.5 million people. To make ships, they did what everybody else did, the Venetians and the Portuguese and Spaniards, which was to saw wood with a man on top and a man on the bottom. They called the pitman, going up and creating these planks to be able to make the ships. So there's a story, which I think is probably not true, that he once saw a kid sharpening a knife with a handheld little thing that converted the rotary motion of his hand into a motion that would uh, get the blade honed. And but what for whatever reason he had the idea that he could convert the rotary motion of a windmill into something that could actually bring a saw and move that saw up and down to be able to create logs from a plank. But the second part of that, which I think was really, really the most clever part, and by the way, other people had thought of that. There was a French engineer that about, I don't know, 10 or 20 years before had actually designed or did a graphic of a windmill with a saw, was to do it in such a way that in that motion, he could synchronize the feeding of the log into the saw. So it's a little bit like the way that I thought of it was that, let's say you had invented a table saw, and we all, by the way, the circular saws were invented a lot later, but let's say you have a circular saw. And we all know that to use a circular saw, we take it by hand, most, at home or whatever, when we have one, and we will feed the wood into it. What he found was a way to synchronize the action in such a way that the log was actually fed into the saw. And so you would put the log into one end and planks would come out the other.
Mm.
And so that very clever uh, uh, unit was why I call it the world's first industrial machine. This was almost 200 years before the steam engine that we think of. Uh, but the the other challenge was to actually make it robust enough to where it could do something like, because this wasn't a toy. There were automata at the time, and people had clocks and had things, but to actually work in an industrial level, that was the other challenge. And finally, what was interesting to me, was that this was documented because this was actually patented, as opposed to, well, some things are lost in time, like who actually did the wheel? I don't know. Who invented fire and all the no, this was actually somebody that did it, then took it to the authorities, and the authorities granted him a patent. So in 1593, on December the 15th, he got a patent for this machine.
Yeah, that's quite quite remarkable. And yeah, the turning of I always kind of think about like, oh, all that, taking one motion, turning it into another, like for grinding, grain and whatnot is just a basic gear, two gears, one horizontal,
Right.
one vertical. But to get that up and down motion, as we would later find out with the steam engine, that's a whole new fresh challenge. Yeah, it takes quite someone quite smart to figure out how to get those things moving
Well, I
correctly.
should point out that he did not invent crankshafts. I mean, crankshafts had existed.
Yeah,
What he did was and all the mechanisms within this thing had already existed. It was putting them all together in this very novel way.
yeah,
Uh, and I mean, a couple of centuries later, people discovered bicycles, which is basically the same thing. You take an up
right,
and down motion of in the pedals, and that's converted into
yeah.
the rotation of a bicycle. So
And it's
yeah,
funny that we didn't have bicycles before because it's so simple. Like you'd think the Romans would have cracked bicycles, sort of thing. But there's always other factors, just like you're talking about. Like for the Romans, it was materials. Making a bike out of wood would be very heavy and not very durable. Stone, not even a conversation.
right,
All this type of thing. It took
right,
sophisticated metal, you know, to make the bicycle possible. The advent of
exactly.
of, of, of
Engineering.
steel. Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. I mean, and it's kind of funny because especially when you talk about all of the parts existed, but he put them together in the right way to make this happen. There's so many things that, you know, when we talk about innovation, my dad's always maintained we haven't invented anything new since 1970. And I'm like, no, we have. It's just, it has a lot of the new tech doesn't reach the consumer. It's for stuff that
Hmm.
affects consumers, but it's not like television or the telephone where it radically changes our lives, sort of thing.
Hmm.
Or changes how we do things. It's material science, it's pharmaceuticals, it's stuff that you're not keeping it in your home, but there's a lot of really fascinating stuff happening. It's just not
Uh-huh.
necessarily changing our lives in those ways. And it's like I told him once, I said, Dad, look at an MRI machine. We took helium and magic rocks, spin them around, and we take pictures inside the body. 200 years ago, that would have been witchcraft. Like anyone would have thought
Exactly.
this is witchcraft. Burn, burn, burn. People would have been absolutely frightened. When they first invented the steam engine, they said women shouldn't ride on trains because they thought if women traveled more than 20 miles an hour, their uteruses would fall out. Like just right there in the train
Oh,
car, just flump.
they,
Like
they don't?
surprisingly enough, yeah. That's what female race car drivers
Yeah.
don't tell you. Um, you know, um, yeah, it's a crazy sort of thing. People get ideas and everything. But this is something like where like this sort of thing obviously radically changed shipbuilding. Probably kept, the Netherlands from being stuck back with Spain and all this type of thing. And you have but the reality is this huge invention did not change the life of the everyday Dutch person in 1593, but it was vitally important for the world, you know.
Well, it very quickly did. And that's where the cascade begins.
Mm,
In terms of creating all of these ships, uh, in the middle part of that decade, the Dutch began to challenge the Spaniards and the Portuguese in the spice trade. And they were always great merchants, but they were
right.
selling stuff that they would get from other people. And then they started sending their own expeditions. But what this dramatically accelerated was their supply of ships.
Mm,
Now, what that led to was in 1602, they created the Dutch East Indies Company to frankly eliminate the competitors. And where there were a lot of ships or a lot of people sending all of these boats and competing with each other. They said, no, let's all get together. And this company grew to become the world's most important company in reasonably short order, which dramatically changed the lives of everyday Dutch men and women.
Yeah.
And the Dutch East Indies Company became the prototype for all the corporations that we know today. Uh, and in these ways, in fact, by the way, the British East India Company had been chartered 2 years before in 1600, but it was chartered by Queen Elizabeth I. Now that's important, and the shareholders as they were rich merchants,
Mm.
and they would fund voyage by voyage. In other words, let's go in. We're putting in our money. We're going to send this ship out to the East Indies, and we're going to be bringing back whatever, and then the spoils come back. Then we divide it out. What the Dutch did was that no, we're not going to do that. They had what we would call today the first IPO. We're going to create a company with permanent capital. People put their money in. There's going to be a board of directors. There's going to be all of these things, and then we're going to go out and buy a bunch of ships, and we're going to do this as a company. What was interesting to me was the democratization of it, because in fact, there's a whole chapter in this about the next to the last investor was a woman, was a maidservant. And so this is the first time in the history of humanity that commoners could actually buy shares in a company.
Right.
And so she bought shares in a company. They were tradable shares. In other words, she could sell them to somebody else, and in fact, she did within a year. But eventually, this was already happened in 1602, less than 10 years after the invention of the sawmill. And then by 1611, in the Netherlands, they had the very first stock exchange. So every time you and I go out and buy a share of stock, uh, or any investment that we make like that, it all traces back to that, because before that it didn't exist,
No, I mean that
and
that
that had
is
that
yes.
had a dramatic impact.
But I think what's crazy about this is all from a man who put parts together, harnessed the wind to saw wood, and that,
Exactly.
it's like the weirdest tech tree to be like if you're playing like a computer game, and it would be kind of like sawmill shipping stock exchange like sort of like it's all that's just always an endlessly fascinating thing where it's just kind of like, oh my goodness. These things that you think wouldn't relate do, and all these other things start and happen because, oh, that problem is now solved, or we can do that much more quickly, or whatever have you. And you see this thing repeat with textiles, 200 years after this, some great things happen. We get steam powered looms, power shuttles, power looms that
Right,
can weave fabric very quickly. You get the cotton gin, which makes getting cotton fibers much easier.
right,
What was a labor intensive process became somewhat less labor intensive, and
right.
and then you have this huge textiles in industry, and that it's like even with like modern, like the idea of a cash crop, the idea that you grow something not to eat but to sell, to use for something else. That's the foundation of the United States. When we figured out we could grow cotton, tobacco, indigo, that was our first, foray into global trade. And that also,
And
which gave us two wonderful things, including slavery, the Civil War, and a lot of money. Like that's
I'm glad you pointed it out, because in one of the timelines in the book, I do point out that the cotton gin, the creation of the cotton gin, took the number of enslaved people in the United States from 700,000 to 4 million,
yeah.
in very short order, and created the conditions for the Civil War. But not only that, all the industrial tensions that occurred even where the textile mills were located, which was in England. And this
Yeah.
whole thing about communism, whatever, and workers that left farms. It's a fascinating cycle of developments that, like you say, if you trace it back and say, well, that wouldn't have happened, this hadn't happened, and just go
Yeah.
back one more step. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a, and I did a series with my seamstress Brady McSlane, who was just texting me about she's doing her holiday dress, and we've been redesigning it a little bit today. But her and I did a series on this show called Fashion Moves the World, and I had never really looked at how the fashion industry changed and shifted geopolitics. And then as we're going through and we're talking about, synthetic dyes, synthetic fibers, natural fibers, the trade in these things, she's talking about, the clothes and the fibers. And I'm talking about that too, because we used to own a boutique together and used to design together all this type of thing. But then, of course, I being a political science expert, I'm bringing in all these, well, yeah, then that caused that war. And that's why this colonization happened, all this. And so by the end of the series, we had 6 episodes. By the end of the series, I was kind of like I'd never really sat down to do this kind of comparative, fashion and geopolitics. But by the reason why we called it Fashion Moves the World, as I said kind of offhandedly at the end, I'm like, really, fashion moves the world. We want, beaver hats from Canada, buffalo skins from the American West. We want cotton from the Americas, all this type of thing. Also that we can look a certain way. And companies get set up, ships built with the sawmills that you from the place the sawmills from the guy you wrote about all this stuff. It's like, yeah, it's like fashion moves the world. Like in a weird
well,
way, fashion moves the world. So,
well,
and this strikes me
in
the same
support,
way.
no, in support of what you're saying, uh, what the Spaniards and what the Portuguese first, and then the Spanish, they were finding the whole reason why the Americas were quote discovered was finding ways to go to Asia, but there was already trade with Asia way before because the Roman ladies in imperial Rome had silk, and they would bring it from China. And
Yeah.
so you're right, and they wanted that silk, and that's when globalization of trade began. And what these ships, all they did was they cut out the middleman of all that route from the Great Silk Road that went over across. So you're right. Fashion does rule the world.
Yeah, it
Well,
was
I'm going to say one more thing: fashion and flavor. Because the other
yes,
thing that happened was that people were perhaps wanted to tart up their food, and they said, "Well, no, now we can have pepper and cloves and things that they didn't."
nutmeg
So
and
between
yeah.
fashion and food, that's why the world
No,
exists.
no, I always laugh every time I open a spice cabinet and I take out like nutmeg or something. I'm like, 300 years ago, I'm the richest man in town. For a jar of nutmeg I bought at Target for $2. Like people, our answers would be shocked, kind of like, you have 17 jars of spice in your house. You must be fabulously rich. I'm like, no, I'm a full-time working artist. It's just gotten a lot cheaper since your day. We figured out airplanes and faster ships. It's a whole thing. We'll talk more. It's sort of thing. Yeah, it's a crazy
Right.
it's a quite crazy crazy thing. And no, yeah, absolutely. All of this stuff gets set up to move these things faster and even with things like Silk Road and the huge amount of trading and the whole civilizations you know created and built around that. There was a I don't know if you are super into like British television or anything, but there's a British actress named Joanna Lumley, and she does a series of travel programs. And she did the Silk Road one time, starting in
Right.
Turkey and travels all the way to China and everything. And and all
Hmm.
the little, the countries and peoples long forgotten that all had a hand in that and were a part of that. And China's now recalling it with their Belt and Road program. They're trying to
Exactly.
recreate that, for them on the Eurasian continent. Um, to which point I tell them have fun negotiating with some of those former Soviet countries, but that's have fun with that, China.
Right.
So, but yeah, so I
Well,
want to, this is all fascinating, but I want to talk about writing process for a moment. Um, did you plan assiduously, outline, put it all together, or did you just kind of read all this stuff, grab your research, and start writing?
Um, I the first step again was to understand the technology. Then I came up with the the cascade, which included going through the Glorious Revolution in England and all kinds of stuff. And then I said I couldn't help myself. I said I have to share this. I mean, it was sort of like they were a kid, and I said, look what I found." And so I did create an outline of it. And the process was reasonably long for me because from my first drafts, and then I began to share it, everybody said I was crazy. Yeah,
Mhm.
because I learned words that are monocausal that I which I had not worked with before,
Mhm.
which is, are you telling me that that one thing uh, there are a lot of factors that created all these. So then that forced me to continue working on it and working on it uh, until I came up with another word that I learned, which was a contrafactual, which was, well, okay, what would happen if he had not existed, if this had not been invented? And I came to the conclusion that the world as we know it would not exist had this not happened. And again, in my book I trace it. I think almost. I won't call it. Well, it's like step by step, and it'll take you through that process. And once I had that, then I had to review and revise everything that I'd done. So it took me about a year.
Oh, yeah. I mean yeah, that's quite, I mean, that's relatively fast as books go. So, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, impressive
Well,
that you
I'm
were able to.
retired, so I don't have anything to do.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I mean, yeah, most people, it's, I mean, it's 1 to 2 years. So when someone gets something, that's relatively quick, I would say. But
Right, right,
yes,
right.
having plenty of time in retirement is good, but having the motivation to do it all the time is also very important. So,
Well, I do become obsessive, so I said no, no, and so uh, I created my thesis, and in fact, with some, I have a nephew in college, and I said, hey, get all your friends. I would love to buy them. I want everybody to take a shot at this and say, okay, tell me where I'm wrong, uh, because I did share it with one college professor. And the knee jerk reaction is that no, no, monocausality and a lot of factors and this, that, this can't be right because people don't think that way. And I think that if I were an academic, I probably wouldn't have had the guts to publish this book because I am saying that this is the way it happened. And that is a very challenging thing but again, I can do that because I'm not an academic or a scholar. A
no.
scholar would have to, whatever, right? So now I'm in a position to where I'm saying, look, please, please challenge me, tell me where I'm wrong, and I'd love the debate. So
Yeah. No, 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 absolutely. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I don't know. Do you suppose is this the only book you planned on writing? Are you working on anything now, or is this kind of the thing?
well, as a result of this examination, again, there's a very important element that all of this would not have happened if all of these things that happened in the Netherlands had not been moved over to England in
Mm,
the Glorious Revolution in 1688. I began to look into the Glorious Revolution, and I have a draft of a book around the Glorious Revolution, William of Orange, Mary II, and all of that, and the things that led up to that glorious revolution. And I will admit that part of the reason was that my family and I had been in London uh, in the 300th anniversary of the Glorious Revolution. I've kind of been interested in it, and there are a lot of fascinating anecdotes around that period. That again, I've written a draft of that book. there's a
Well,
third
ultimate
book.
Parliament invites William of Orange to become King of England, and I'm sure he brought some ideas with him.
Well, it's interesting. There are a lot of different ways of looking at that. Uh, the reality is that William of Orange came in with, I don't know, 14,000 ships. He actually came in to invade England. And that is precisely the thesis of my book, that there are a lot of things that are told, for example, that he was invited, and there were seven people that wrote this letter or whatever. But we don't know if that letter was actually uh, something that they actually did, or William of Orange uh, created for them. This is a. I don't want to get into too far, but I did tell
Yeah,
you that I'm from Mexico.
yeah,
Mexico had a quote emperor, and his name was Maximilian.
yes.
And in the middle
Remember
part
the
of the next,
Alamo?
well, no, that was actually after the Alamo was before, but
Yes.
uh, but Maximilian was Austrian, but to make a long story short, there's a I kind of follow a lot of Mexican history, in particular Maximilian, and my wife and I were in Austria, and we went to a little town called Hardegg, which was on the border of then Czechoslovakia, because at that time it was Czechoslovakia, and I don't even know if it's on the border with Slovakia or Czechia or whatever, but that's where it was, and it was a little museum devoted to him, and I saw a letter, and that letter, which was a surprise to a Mexican, was a letter from Mexicans inviting him to come over and to become emperor.
Mm,
Okay. This is not the things that are told in Mexican history. So, in any event, there was a quote invitation. I'm not so sure that that invitation was real. There are things, but that's again an entirely different book. And then
yeah.
there's a third thing that I really enjoyed, which is the history of basically public health and the eradication of smallpox. Both from a different angle, because it was a royal philanthropical expedition that set off from Galicia in northern Spain in 1803, which is very, very little known in the English literature about this Spanish doctor that eventually helped not only conquer smallpox, but also to create a lot of the things that are now, in terms of eradication of disease. The protocols were invented then, but I don't know. Perhaps you already were aware of him. Perhaps you had heard of this. Uh, but he's very little known, again, in the English literature. So,
Yeah.
uh, the, had
No,
you heard of him?
No, but then again, I haven't particularly dug into that story, other than we eventually did eliminate it from the world with mass inoculations in the 70s. And so, I wouldn't be the litmus test on that. Other people may, who actually really get into the public health end of things and things like that.
Right.
So, but me not so far, but I'm sure other people who know more may have. No, that's all. That's absolutely all fascinating. And yeah, I always ask about future work because it's always interesting to see what other things people are working on and thinking about, and what we can think of next. I think the Maximilian angle is very very interesting. Here's how not much of Mexican history I know. I did not know he was Austrian. And it's kind of a funny idea that they become like, yeah, we need to hire someone to be in charge. Who are you thinking? Well, I'm thinking we need an outside candidate. We should find some nice white European fellow to come here and run things. Who's available? Like, and a small little committee is formed
Yeah,
and
well,
sort of
it's a
thing.
complex story.
Yeah.
It's a complex story, but that's how it evolved. No, the
Yeah.
other story is one that you mentioned, which was the cotton gin, because a lot of, or very few people know what you know, which is that the cotton gin was a lot more than just a simple little invention by this guy Eli Whitney,
Mhm.
I think it was in the 1790s or something, whatever. I forgot the
Yeah.
exact date. Uh,
Yeah.
but it really did transform the world in many, many ways, socially and politically, besides making textiles available to the great unwashed masses, such as the common person of the time.
No, I mean it's even in this country, bales of cotton were about 5 feet wide. So railroad tracks in the South were slightly wider than the standard gauge of 4 feet 8 inches. Autism moment here, of 4 feet 8 inches because a bale of cotton was wider. And during towards the end of Reconstruction, the railroads in the South were standardized. So they had the day the gauge changed. There's a great video on YouTube that talks about all the preparations that went into adjusting the rolling stock, and in the literally in the middle of the night, they had men in multiple states literally go around, undo the do the nails, and then move the
Yeah.
rail in about 6 inches, put it back, and then and then all the sort of thing, all because of cotton, because cotton bales were so wide, so they built train cars this wide, so the rails had to be this, all this everything, because of cotton was determining the width of rails for transportation. I mean, it just goes and goes and goes to all these different things, and that gets back into, well, why was that? Because the cotton gin was invented and we demanded more of it, so we had bales of cotton, and it just goes and goes, and I find that stuff fascinating. So this has been a fascinating
Right.
conversation, and I'm, yeah, very much looking forward to to
Well,
all of that.
again, I invite my listeners to challenge some of these conclusions, and I will, of course. Uh, I don't know if uh, Natalie from will provide an email address to be able to capture all the doubts and all the questions, and I'd be again fascinated. In the book, I do have a whole section which is common questions of people are saying, well, this can't be, and uh, and I
Yeah.
try to address those, and but it all comes down to this illusion that we have, which is that we were inevitable. As I point out in the book, that if our parents had not met, we would not exist. But that meeting didn't cause our birth. Uh, uh, and I'm not saying that this invention caused the modern world, but if it had not existed, if our parents had not met, we would not exist.
No, I mean, at some point,
And
thank God for
so, and
No, I mean at some point, thank God for the cotton gin because
I'm sorry.
I'm black, my mother's white. If the cotton gin had never been invented, Europeans would never brought my father's ancestors here, and then I wouldn't exist. So ultimately, your cotton gin was very important to me being here to have this conversation with you today. So my ancestors had to be transported, enslaved, transported in ships, so that my father could be born in 1946 in Alabama, the son of sharecroppers growing onions, so that we could be here today to talk about windmills in the Netherlands.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
no,
Well, thank you very
definitely.
much, Cameron. It's been delightful.
Yeah.
And if you have any other questions or any other observations, I'd be delighted. Again, this is an intellectual exercise for me, and I truly enjoy it.
No, no, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, we've come to the part of the show where we do plugs. So why don't you let me know where we can find you online, where we can buy the book, all this type of thing, so that we can follow along.
Well, thank you. To tell you the truth, we were supposed to be published tomorrow.
Yeah.
There was a slight technical delay on the print side. It's going to be on Amazon. Uh, the You can order an ebook as tomorrow. It's called "Forgotten: How One Man Unlocked the Modern World," and the print edition will be available on December the 18th. And
Mm.
I encourage readers more than anything else to go through it, and to keep an open mind, because again, this is a rewriting of history. It is not a conventional history text in which people will say, "Oh, okay, well this," because again, we as you know. there are many stories told in history that aren't necessarily exactly the way it happened.
No, no, and not that this is a politics conversation, but that oftentimes is a lot of the problems we have today is I always am telling people on Twitter, you're trying to make a myth you were told real. And that's not really reflective of the past. So no, I love this. I love this. The whole alternative forgotten. My Nana would love this book. I'm gonna have to grab a copy for her because she will love this. So that's my Christmas
Uh,
shopping sorted.
I would
Um,
I would be delighted to I will send your Nana a copy, and I hope she enjoys reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it.
Absolutely wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.